Check out how you can get those solar panels installed at your home or residence by going to onesolarsolution.com. Bringing you the world news coming up next. This is Radio Caravan, the world news, read by Shabnam Modgill. Vice President Mike Pence and Democratic challenger Kamala Harris will square off today in their only debate as President Trump's coronavirus diagnosis and the ongoing pandemic continue to roil the U.S. presidential contest. Former Vice President Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential nominee, is leading Trump in national polls, including an advantage of 12 percentage points in the latest Reuters Ipsos survey of likely voters with less than 4 weeks until the November 3rd election. Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, the vice presidential debate set for tonight, follows the disorderly primetime spectacle last week that had viewers of President Trump and Democratic rival Joe Biden's matchup bemoaning the moderator's inability to shut off a candidate's microphone. As Vice President Pence has worked to level Trump's roughshod style and steer his response to the coronavirus pandemic, he will face a U.S. Senator sharp for sharp questioning there and has made it clear she wants to invoke her prosecutorial chops on the debate stage tonight. Vice presidential debates are usually known more for exposing pitfalls than for the ability to fundamentally alter the state of play, but that was before President Trump's recent hospitalization for COVID-19. Now the matchup between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris tonight in Salt Lake City has shifted from sideshow to center stage. The event has already been met with a preamble about the precautions the Commission on Presidential Debates should take to avoid spreading the deadly virus. The Biden campaign pointing to the Trump's entourage's refusal to wear masks at the first general election debate and the subsequent infections that made the Rose Garden look like a Carnival cruise ship has pushed increased distance between Pence and Harris. President Trump's return to the White House is poised to reshape the campaign's final 4 weeks as aides debated how to move past an extraordinary setback while grappling with how to send an infected president back on the road. A race that had remained steady throughout the tumult of this year now threatens to slip away from the president after he spent 72 hours hospitalized with COVID-19. And President Trump appeared to be using this bout with COVID-19 to try to gain an advantage over his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden, even as the number of infections around him continued to rise and some of America's top military leaders went into quarantine. It is General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General James McConville, the Army Chief of Staff, and several other Pentagon leaders quarantining after being exposed to the coronavirus. And 2 more White House staffers also tested positive, including a military aide and one of President Trump's valets, an active member of the U.S. military who traveled with the president last week. The latest cases bring the number of infections among individuals who either work at the White House or have recently attended events there to 19. Suburbanization could turn some swing states blue, according to a new study. Swing states that voted for President Trump in 2016 have become so attractive to city dwellers since the last presidential election that it could tip some of their electoral votes towards former Vice President Joe Biden in this election. Republicans are mobilizing thousands of volunteers to watch early voting sites and ballot drop boxes leading up to November's election. And part of an effort, this is, to find evidence to back up President Trump's unsubstantiated complaints about widespread voter fraud. President Trump continued to downplay the threat of the coronavirus after his release from the hospital while he's still under treatment for COVID-19, asserting that the virus that has killed more than 210,000 Americans is, and I quote, far less lethal in most populations. One of the most pressing questions raised by President Trump falling ill with COVID-19 has been when exactly he contracted the coronavirus. And in guidance updated yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention finally acknowledged that airborne transmission of small droplets can be responsible for coronavirus infections, including at a distance of more than 6 feet away in some situations. Facebook announced a ban on all accounts linked to the QAnon conspiracy group as the social network tries to clamp down on misinformation ahead of a heated U.S. presidential election. Drug makers and research centers around the world are working on COVID-19 vaccines with large global trials of several of the candidates involving tens of thousands of participants well underway. And in a pair of late-night tweets, President Trump changed course on negotiating coronavirus relief that he had earlier announced he was calling off until after the election. He said Congress should quickly extend $25 billion in new payroll assistance to U.S. passenger airlines, furloughing thousands of workers as air travel remains down sharply amid the pandemic. And global billionaire wealth has smashed record levels during COVID-19, breaching the $10 trillion mark for the first time. Eddie Van Halen, the pioneering guitar player whose hard-rocking band emerged from the Sunset Strip music scene in Los Angeles in the early 70s to stand at the top of rock and roll for a decade, has died of cancer. He was 65 years old. Hurricane Delta made landfall in Mexico at 5:30 this morning as an extremely dangerous Category 2 storm coming ashore near Puerto Morelos along the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. And the Nobel Prize in Chemistry 2020 was awarded this morning jointly to Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna for the development of a method for genome editing. The French and American scientists developed this method of genome editing known as CRISPR. Kuwait's Deputy Chief of National Guard, who spent years in the oil-rich country's security services, was nominated as Crown Prince this morning. This nomination makes Sheikh Mishal Al-Ahmed Al-Jabr Al-Sabah the possible heir apparent to the new Emir. 83-year-old Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmed Al-Sabah was propelled to power a week ago following the death of his half-brother. Israeli police clashed with hundreds of ultra-Orthodox Jews overnight as they sought to enforce restrictions on public gatherings during a nationwide coronavirus lockdown. And the fighting between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces over the separatist region continued today. And Iran's president warning that fighting between Azeri and ethnic Armenian forces in the South Caucasus could trigger regional war as the death toll rose on the 11th day of hostilities. More than 300 have now died in this renewed fighting. And Iran's President Hassan Rouhani warned that his country will not tolerate the presence of foreign fighters, terrorists that Iran has fought for years near its northern border, where this conflict is raging between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Iranian state TV said the country has hit its highest number of daily deaths from the coronavirus, with 239 new fatalities reported today. Denmark has summoned the Iranian ambassador over reports the diplomatic mission had allegedly pressured Iranian women living in the Scandinavian country to accept divorce terms drawn up by local imams. Lebanon's president called for binding consultations with members of parliament next week to name a new prime minister. And Cyprus and Lebanon reaffirmed an agreement for Lebanese authorities to take back migrants aboard boats trying to reach the Cypriot shores. Belarus's opposition leader is meeting with top German officials today, a day after sitting down with Chancellor Angela Merkel in Berlin. She's been trying to lobby support for the Belarus opposition movement. You're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. And North Korea's former acting ambassador to Italy defected to the south after disappearing from the mission in Rome 2 years ago. About 30,000 North Koreans have fled repression and poverty under the communist regime and settled in the capital's south, mostly by first secretly crossing over the porous border with China. And at least 4 people died when members of 2 criminal factions attacked each other in a sprawling camp for Rohingya refugees. In this report from Dhaka, 20 other refugees were injured as the 2 groups opened fire with locally made guns and used sharp weapons at Kutupalong in Cox's Bazar district. Security there has been heightened in the camps, where more than 700,000 Rohingya refugees from Myanmar have been sheltered by the government. A proposed amendment to Sri Lanka's constitution that would consolidate power in the president's hands has raised concerns about the independence of the country's institutions and the impact on ethnic minorities who fear their rights could be undermined by a nationalist Sinhala Buddhist parliamentary majority. And if passed, this amendment will bring parliament under the control of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who will have the power to dissolve the legislature, appoint top judges and have full immunity against any prosecution and make decisions critical for minorities without checks. Australia's city of Melbourne, the capital of the coronavirus hotspot state of Victoria, today reported the lowest 2-week average of new cases after a second contagion wave that led to one of the world's toughest lockdowns. And External Affairs Minister Jaishankar held separate bilateral meetings with foreign ministers of Japan and Australia on the sidelines of the Quad meeting in Tokyo. India's Olympic-bound boxers, except for an indisposed MC Mary Kom and 2 others, will travel to Italy and France starting next week on a 52-day training-cum-competition trip as they gear up for the Tokyo Games. And just when the Kolkata Knight Riders found their winning combination, they came up against a roadblock. Their 18-run loss against the Delhi Capitals after 2 dominant victories over Sunrisers Hyderabad and the Rajasthan Royals took them back to the drawing board. India's COVID-19 tally of cases climbed to 67.57 lakhs with over 72,000 new cases. And the government will launch a campaign from tomorrow to spread awareness on the measures people need to follow to check the spread of the coronavirus. And with rising pilgrim traffic, the Rudraprayag district administration in Uttarakhand has now decided that the priests of Kedarnath will be tested for COVID-19 every 15 days. Nearly a month after heavy scrutiny and arrest by India's Narcotics Control Authority for her alleged role in a drugs case related to Sushant Singh Rajput, Riya Chakrabarti granted bail on a bond of ₹1,00,000, but not her brother. Delhi's air quality has entered the poor zone this morning for the first time since June, and India will await the Chinese response at the 7th Military Commanders meeting on the 12th of October, as China said that the United States should stop its unprovoked attacks and accusations accusing U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo of maliciously creating political confrontation and smearing Beijing. And Pakistan has said that Hong Kong's affairs are an internal matter of China, underscoring the importance of not interfering in the domestic affairs of sovereign states. Information Minister Shibli Faraz reiterated that the government and Prime Minister Imran Khan did not have anything to do with the FIR against former Premier Nawaz Sharif and 40 other PMLN leaders for conspiring against the state. And Admiral Amjad Khan Niazi this morning assumed command as the 22nd Chief of the Naval Staff during a change of command ceremony held at the PNS Zafar in Islamabad. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have in the news for you today on this 7th of October.